We now continue our session on quality management systems. We have studied Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award and ISO 9000 models. Now, let us look at one more model called CMMI, Capability Maturity Model Integrated, proposed by Software Engineering Institute located at Carnegie Mellon University in USA. Basically, this particular model is exclusively aimed at software businesses. So, from that point of view, its relevance is highest, to software development practices. We begin this particular concept of capability, maturity, by basically understanding what do we mean by a process. So, if you look at the slide, what do we have as a slide, then we have a process, So, process is a set of activities, methods, practices and tools and whatever else required that help people in developing and maintaining systems. So, you get an input, you have an output, it results in a product or a service, then the focus is on people, procedures, methods, tools, equipment, okay, and last but not least, all the time you are measuring and monitoring what is happening. The two things which are important, one is the efficiency and the other is the effectiveness of this particular process. Obviously, efficiency indicates how well the resources are consumed for making the product, and effectiveness indicates the appropriateness of the product for the intended use. So, from this particular point of view, if you were to look at it, okay, we now need to understand two terms, what is the process capability and what is process maturity. Now, if you look at the slides again, process capability, we talk of something that indicates the range of results that can be expected by adhering to the process. So, if you were to follow this particular process again and again, what kind of outcome will you get? It's in that particular sense, it's a predictor of the project outcome. Okay. Now, quality of a product is very heavily influenced by the quality of the process, and from that particular point of view, capability is a very important consideration. Now, process maturity indicates, the extent to which a process is explicitly defined, managed, measured, controlled, and in short, it is effective. So, if you were to look at a matured process, for instance, it is consistent with the way work gets done, like what you say and what you do is similar. It is well defined, it is well understood, and it is used in a consistent manner throughout the organization. Okay. So, it allows people to fully exploit their potential for developing the particular product. But not only that, it is also amenable to improvement. So, once you have a documented process, we can think of improving it on an ongoing basis. So, process maturity is basically something that is measurable indicator of the process quality. Process maturity is a measurable indicator of the process quality. Now, we look at the next particular, what do you mean by a maturity level? Again, if you look at the slide, the main objective behind defining the maturity level, is to achieve a controlled and a measured process as a foundation for continuing improvement. Let us understand this a little more in detail now. Okay. First, the levels that we define must be reasonably realistic, in the sense that they must represent the actual historical phases of evolution and of course, the improvements that are followed in an organization, not one organization, in a group of organizations. Okay. They must also represent a measure of improvement that is reasonable to achieve from the prior level to the next level. It's like indicating that, one is that there are being multiple steps to go from one level to another, and the other is each particular step, being realistic enough to be climbed. Okay. So, once we have done that, we say that again, if you look at the side, maturity structure is intended for use with a specific assessment methodology, okay, and a management system. What it means is, organization should be in a position to do a self assessment about the current maturity status, and obviously once you got the current maturity status, you will think in terms of improvement. Okay. So, it should provide a structure for prioritizing the improvements in the organizational context. Okay. So, if you have a concept of this particular maturity levels, then we are going to be using this particular data for a variety of purposes. Once the organization's maturity level is defined, okay, that concentrating on the next level is easy. You also know what exactly are your weaknesses, and where you need to put in effort to do the improvement. Okay. So, if a project planning system is ineffective in your organization, it is not possible to introduce advanced methods and technology, because they really wouldn't really give you any great deal of benefit. Actually, it will add to the confusion. Okay. So, we need to first make sure that we have a project planning system in place, and obviously as and when required at an appropriate time, we could bring in more advanced methodology and technology for doing that particular. So, maturity levels are very useful from that particular point of view. Now, let us look at what do we call as capability maturity models. So, if you again look at the slide, we say what is capability maturity model? So, capability maturity model is a process management and quality improvement concept applicable in different focus areas. So, for instance, if software development was your focus area, you could develop a capability maturity model for that. If you are interested in total software system development, including software, hardware, telecommunication, integration, implementation, you could develop a capability maturity model for that also. In case you are getting the work done in a contracted fashion, one could develop the capability maturity model for that purpose also. Okay. So, as we see in the slide, the capability maturity models may be viewed as a collection of practices which an organization follows, into basically these particular practices can be also grouped into process areas. Okay. These are the terminologies which are very specific to different models that we use, but so we have different practices which are grouped by process areas, and ultimately it gives you the complete capability maturity model. Then these particular models act as a reference model for process assessment and improvement. Again, this is like a background music, but all the time we keep on reviewing it. If you cannot measure, you cannot know where you are and where you want to go, So, measurement and improvement are central to all the activity that we are talking about. So, the capability maturity models are very useful in that particular sense. Now, there are several capability maturity models which got evolved over time. Okay. If you look at the slide again, the most well known is the software CMM, which is very talked of very often in the software industry. Then there is a systems engineering CMM, then there is a integrated product development CMM, and there is a software acquisition CMM, and then there is a people CMM, and CMMs and CMMs and CMMs. Once you have so many CMMs, you are in trouble, because you might want to follow more than one, So, for instance, your company may be interested in doing software development and also interested in the total solution providing kind of a business, in which case you might be required to follow two models. Okay. Now, once we have multiple models that an organization is required to follow, we run into many problems. We have different architectures, different terminologies, different processes, and then the concept of improvement also varies from one model to another. So, from this particular point of view, if you had an integrated kind of a model, in case you had an integrated model, then this is likely to help you a great deal. So, if you look at the slide again, we say, the motivation behind having an integrated model, is to provide one model across the entire life cycle. Okay? That means, it is a means of integrating multiple assessment activities, training and so on and so forth. Okay. So, different models can be clubbed together to form a new model. So, we have CMMI software and systems, version 1.02, okay, and the ultimate aim is to have a CMMI which integrates 4 models, software, systems, the product, getting the product done and the acquisition of the product. Okay. So, subcontracting, acquisition, systems engineering, software, all these things, if we could be sort of putting it together under a common model, then an organization need not have multiple models that it follows for a different purposes, and a common model will suit the requirements. And obviously, in the common model, we will ignore those particular aspects of the model which are not relevant for a specific project, those can be ruled out. So, the another major advantage is the assessment method for the capability maturity model will also be uniform. Okay. So, if you look at the slide again, we can have SCAMPI, the standard CMMI assessment method for process improvement, as a method which is used for assessing each particular organization on the CMMI, whichever the particular phase you are trying to work on. Now, when SEI went from CMM to CMMI, CMM software to CMMI, obviously a lot of good things from other models came in, and other segments benefited from the practices followed in the software kind of area. So, looking at the quote unquote the market requirements, the CMMI was provided in a tailorable kind of a fashion, and they provide 2 different ways in which you can apply a CMMI. One particular is known as a staged model and other is a continuous model. The 2 models are only apparently different, but not conceptually the soundness and evaluation and the criteria for both the models are exactly the same. It is like saying that if you had a set of things and a set of bags, how will you really like to organize the packing, and maybe one person would like to pack it in one way and another person would like to pack the bags in another way. So, if you look at the slide now, on one particular side we have a staged model. In a staged model, what you have? You have 5 levels, from initial, managed, defined, quantitatively managed and optimizing. For those of you who might be familiar with your CMM software, these levels were previously called by slightly different names. They were called initial and repeatable, defined and managed and optimizing, but with minor particular differences, otherwise the conceptually it remained the same. So, you have 5 levels which you need to go through. So, what it shows, as the diagram again is showing, that you go from initial to managed to defined to quantitatively managed to optimizing kind of level, and obviously there is no concept of not applicable. See, the very fact that you want to be assessed for a particular model itself puts you in the earlier particular concept at level 1. Level 1 means basically you are willing to be assessed, and the true levels beyond 0 really were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So, this particular approach, the organization can be at one level and it would like to progress to the next level. So, you can't go from level 2 to level 4, you have to go to level 4. You can't say that you are at level say 2 unless you have met all the earlier requirements, obviously which is nil, but you can't go to level 3 unless you have met level 2 and so on and so forth. Now, if you were to look at the continuous particular model that you have, okay, again look at the diagram, and what you have, all this model, basically even the stage model consists of process areas. We will see what is the process area. There are 22 process areas, and in the continuous model you are assessed in each of these 22 areas. And if you really want to be at level 5 something in the stage particular model, you need to be minimum at level 3 in all the 22 areas and achieved 4 and 5, in reasonable number of process areas, 4 and 5 levels in reasonable number of areas, and then only you are in a position to be assessed at level 5, But basically here what it says that you have 22 areas, and on each of these particular areas the assessment method will tell you as to what level do you have. So here you have the concept of the 6th particular thing, is that particular process area may not be applicable in your say. So you have not applicable, initial, managed, defined, quantitatively managed and optimized. In one particular case you are calling it as a maturity level, in the other case you are calling it as a capability level. Okay, there are some differences in the two terminology, but basically you are looking at that particular kind of a situation. So what do we really have is, let us look at first the stage model, and then a lot of overlap and learning will take place about the continuous model. We need not spend as much time on the continuous model, because many of the concepts that we look at in the stage model will also be applicable to the continuous particular model. So if you look at the slide again, you will see a stage model. What you are basically seeing is you are going from one level to next, to next, to next, to next, okay, from low to high, and what you are doing is basically doing process performance is being measured, process capability is being measured, process maturity is being measured, and you are improving in all these particular things, and as you go on improving, you go on going from one level to another. So let us now try to understand what really is involved in this particular level. Let us understand what is involved in level. Let us look at the levels a little more in detail. So if you want to look at these particular levels a little more in detail, then we can draw another maturity level structure. Okay, we can draw a different maturity level structure, and we can evolve this particular structure as we progress from level to level. So let us begin now. If you look at the slide again, okay, then we have a first particular level. What is if you look at it, what are we doing at level 1? Okay, so you say level 1, you have an activity, okay, and this particular activity produces some kind of results, okay, and the label, as it says here, it says just do it. What does that really mean? First, we can say that the environment is not very stable for developing and maintaining the system. It works, but it is not a stable environment. Okay, then the engineering practices and the management practices are not very satisfactory. They just remember the background, the things just keep on happening. Okay, planning very low, ineffective. Okay, what we are having basically is a reaction driven system. The commitment is based on the reaction. If you fall behind, apply more resources or something like that. So we react rather than preempt things. The emphasis is always during testing, and especially more the crisis, more rigorously you try to test, which really can put you in a bigger soup. Okay, so success depends basically on having exceptional people. Unless you have good people, this is the only way you are able to achieve your job, but with God on your side. Okay, so unpredictable process capabilities, unpredictable budgets, functionality, quality, and if at all few stable processes is all the capital that you got when you are at level 1. So now let us look at the slide again. Now I say, when you want to go from level 1 to level 2, what do we really want? So the first thing that we want to do is we need to start planning. Then we need to have some kind of a feedback coming in. So we need to have what we plan as a result, get the feedback, and to keep on improving the results based on the evaluation. So planning and evaluation are the two particular things that we add here. Okay, and from that particular point of view, say the simple rule is think before you act and think after you act. These are like a catchword, think before you act and think after you act. Now what are we doing at a level 2? Basically at level 2 we are a little disciplined organization. Okay, the policies exist for managing the project, some kind of planning takes place, though it may be largely based on experience. Okay, successful practices are largely repeatable. Okay, processes are implemented. Though all projects in the company may not follow same processes, but the projects do define the processes before starting the project. Okay, the commitments that we make in terms of cost, schedule, and quality are realistic enough. Okay, so we do this and better track all these things. Again, cost, schedule, and quality are tracked so that we are always on sort of as planned, going as planned. Requirements and work products are baseline. We already we'll talk more about this in the configuration management activities. We exactly specify what is going to be, what component constitutes what product, and so on and so forth. Standards are defined and they are conformed to, and the strong customer supplier relationship exists, and measurement process basically is in place. So, the concept of planning, executing, measuring, getting a feedback from the measurements, and improvement are the catch particular words. Now, once you are at level 2, what you need to do is to go to level 3. So, again, if you look at the slide, what do we do in level 3? Now, in level 3, what we are trying to do is to have, where possible, organization wide standards. Okay? So, we are basically using our lessons that we have learned. We are using the lessons learned. Based on that, we establish standards, and we provide an input both for planning and for evaluation. We provide an input for both planning and evaluation of the project. Okay? So, at the defined level, okay, or at the standards and the consistency level that we have, the organization has standard processes which are used across the organization, by almost all the projects. Effective engineering practices are also there. The integration of engineering processes and the management processes is well done. The reuse of organizational learning, like we say, but less and less, so that even if you have to make a mistake, make sure that you learn from the mistake and don't repeat the same mistake again. Then you have a separate process engineering groups, which concentrates only on improving the processes, learns from the past experience and improves the processes. Training programs need to be organized on an organizational basis, so that all the people understand the same process the way it is documented and practices exactly the same particular way. Okay? So, defining a process by itself is not enough unless people are trained to use that particular process. So, this indicates that at level 3 basically you have a good management insight into the technical progress that the project is making. You have a good idea. Now, obviously, once you are at defined level, it does not make sense to stay at defined level. What you need to really do is to ensure that you do adhere to the defined standards and the procedures or whatever else other things you have defined. So, we now go to, if we were to go from level 3 to level 4, what will we do? Now, look at the again. Now, what we are doing now is, now we started using our past experience to predict, the outcomes. So, one is to plan, other is to predict. Of course, so planning has to be done based on prediction, in the sense that we basically try to see, are we in a position to really sort of achieve the level that we are aiming, or the products and the performance and the other particular things, measurements that we will be taking, will they really give you the results, kind of results that you are looking for. Okay? So, we set quantitative goals. So, we have a fair idea about what we are expecting, and based on that we plan, provide resources. So, quantitative goals are provided for projects and the processes. Okay? The variations are measured not only at the product level, but also at the process performance level. In course of time, you would like that the process performance narrows down to a sort of standard kind of a performance. Okay? Meaningful variations can be distinguished from the random variation. Obviously, what is, anytime you do a measurement, you are only approximating the reality, and some of it is going to be the error due to the wrong assumptions and the wrong understanding of the subject, the other is going to be the random variation in the measurement process. Okay. So, we should be in a position to identify the quote unquote the explained variance and the unexplained variation, in this particular kind of job. So, once you start coming to level 4, then the products that you produce will definitely be of very high quality, and obviously the projects will be very controlled. So, it is definitely showing that you are making a progress whereby you are managing the projects in a quantitative kind of a manner, you are managing the projects in a quantitative kind of a manner. Now, when we go to optimizing level, now you must first realize that when we go to optimizing level, it is not a destination that we reach and then stay there, okay, that nobody can dislodge it. At level 5, when we talk of optimization, we are talking of sort of a remaining at level 5 than reaching level 5. So, let us look at the slide again. Now, what you are doing is to improve, basically create the lessons learned in the past that we are talking about. We were only using what we had, but now we need to continuously add to our standards. So, the knowledge base that we have has to keep on widening, and in level 5 what we are basically doing is providing like a environment in which the pool of knowledge that you have goes on increasing, organization focus is on improvement. Now, you get both incremental and innovative improvements. Now, the incremental advances must happen on an ongoing basis, some small improvements on, and periodically you may have innovative improvements, like suppose there is a breakthrough technology that is available, or you evolve a new method or something like that. So, your improvement optimizing basically means improvements are going to be coming both in small dosage on an ongoing basis, and periodic bursts of very innovative kind of a improvement that you will have. Okay. So, what we are aiming at is a proactive identification of process. We do not wait for something to go wrong, go and study the things and see that if you can anticipate where things may go wrong and take preemptive kind of action. Okay. So, the emphasis is on preventing errors and not on eliminating the levels obviously is a essential particular part, but that is not the main particular focus. Our focus is mainly to prevent things from going on. Okay. So, cost benefit analysis were to be done at this particular stage, then the new technologies and processes will have to be introduced only provided they prove to be cost effective. We are not going to introduce a new technology just because it is available in the market. At this particular level 5, we are going to be very, very concerned about making changes, how much they cost, how much benefit do we receive, and we will have to prove before we adopt new technologies that adopting such a technology will be useful kind of a thing. So, these are the basically the levels that we have. Once we got this particular level, where are we going next? Okay. Now, again let us look at the slide and let us see what are the basic organizations of the various goals and practices in the process areas. Now, if you were to look at it as a bottom up kind of approach, then very frankly what you see at the bottom, and wherever you have this hierarchy particular kind of a thing, is practices, generic practices, specific. Generic practices are common to everything, and specific practices are unique to the specific goals that you have in mind. Okay. Now, these practices contribute to goals, so like shows like a one to many kind of a relationship between the goals and the practices, and these practices, the goals that you have basically are attached to the process areas. So, we have as we have already seen, we have 22 process areas, and for each of these particular process areas we have specific goals and generic goals, and the specific goals are peculiar to the kind of project that you are doing, whereas the generic goals cut across all particular project, and the specific goals will have specific practices and the generic goals Now, let us look at all these particular things, right, starting first let us understand what is the practice, then understand what is the goal, and then what is the process area, and this collection of process areas together give you the maturity model. And in case you achieve certain process area, then those each particular process area will indicate at what maturity level your organization stands. Okay, so let's start from now understanding what is a practice. Okay, practice is an action performed to achieve a specific goal. Okay, so practice basically is to establish, example, like establish estimates for project attributes. Okay, so we have this particular kind of a job, then we need to specify, how this particular job is going to be done. Then for software estimations, we may say that use function point, lines of code, number of objects, number of requirements, all this particular kind of specifications can be given as practices. Okay. For system, we use data volumes, frequencies, interactions, number of user interfaces, such kind of thing. So different types of practices are there. The specific practices differ from one process area to another particular. Generic practices are common to all process areas. Okay. So from our particular point of view, if you were to look at the generic process areas, there are 4 of them. Basically, commitment to perform. How do you prove that appropriate policies and sponsorship is available for sort of achieving what we are planning to achieve? So we need to demonstrate a commitment to perform. Next, just commitment is not good enough, you need ability to perform, So things like the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak kind of approach is not going to work, you need a very healthy spirit followed by a very healthy flesh, So the ability to perform. So process documentations, resource allocation, assignment of responsibility, trainings, etc. need to be taken care of. Once you got the ability and the commitment, that also won't make things happen unless you have implementation. So directing the implementation is very important. So measurements, control practices, how do you start, when do you finish, how do you report, how do you measure, all these things need to be specified. And last but not the least, what you need to specify is verifying. So you might do a good implementation, but by that, you will not be very sure that the things are happening exactly the way. So you need a QC, so some kind of ensuring that the implementation is happening. Okay. So periodic reviews are also required, management reviews may be required, some kind of auditing may be required. So in this particular way, you must have generic practices, these 4 practices: the commitment to perform, the ability to perform, directing the implementation and verifying the implementation are the generic practices that are associated with all the particular processes. Now, once we got the practices, what is the goal? Goal is a high level outcome to be achieved by implementing practices. So the types of goals again can be specific or generic, there is one generic goal, per process area. So you will say, yes, we would like to achieve the error levels to be reduced from so many to so many, per 1000 lines of code. Okay. So the same generic goal is applicable to all process areas at the maturity level. Okay. And from that point of view, we would say that obviously all process areas at the higher maturity level must have the generic requirements of the lower levels. Okay. So there are 1 to 3 specific goals that are attributed to each particular process area. Now, process area is a set of practices that is needed to conform to satisfy the goals of that particular process area. Okay. So process area is a cluster of related practices basically. There are in all 22 process areas in CMMI. Okay. And in stage representation, the process areas are they reside in the maturity levels, and in the continuous representation we will see later, the process areas are grouped by the categories like engineering, project management, process management and support. So in this particular kind of a thing, we have a now if we were to look at this particular thing, then let us see what are the kind of levels that we are following. Let us now look at the process areas at different levels in our CMM. As we mentioned, at level 1 there are no process areas, but now if you look at the slide, we will have to read through a lot of these particular areas. We can't go into too much details of each of this. These are areas, and your requirements management, supplier agreement management, project monitoring and control, project planning, measurement and analysis, process and product quality assurance and configuration management. So, if you look at it from that particular point of view, these are the very minimum rudimentary kind of things that you require, for managing a project. Just to say that you are in a position to run your project in a predictable kind of a manner. So, the term is just manage, okay. But like we said, we still continue to have God on our side, okay. So, then we go to level 3, okay. So, what are the processes that we have? Level 3 is the toughest, in terms of look at the number of areas that we have, okay. First is requirement development, this is akin to what we often call systems analysis, they have technical solution that might correspond with something like a higher level design, lower level design and all that. Then you have a concept of product integration. Once we have the individual components ready, they need to be put together, and how you put together need to be planned at the technical solution stage. And then verification and validation, we have already seen the concept of how verification and validation are different, okay. So, after coding, you need to, for instance, make sure that the code is according to specification and the code also is consistent with the requirements. Then we introduce concepts like risk management. We are going to study in a different, we are going to study risk management ahead. Then integrated project management. Now, this particular concept is, in case you have a software development and communications and you have other particular area, then integrated project management becomes very important. Organizational process focus, you should strive all the time. You say, will not do something unless we have defined a particular process, okay. So, focus is background music, process, write it down, do it according to, write it down, do it according to, right. Once you got the focus, the definition particular part, and then we got the process defined, you need to train the people in using the particular process. Remember, there is a lot of difference between writing it down and people using it the way it is intended to be used, okay. So, decision analysis and resolution in terms of any conflicts, because each of these particular levels, you are going to have plenty of conflicts, and how do you resolve this particular thing, very important. So, you need to have a formal way in which the data is analyzed and the decisions are taken. So, database decision making will be at this particular level. Now, when you go from level 3 to level 4, you suddenly find in terms of number of process areas is very few, okay. So, if you look at the slide again, we have only 2, quantitative project management. We have already seen this particular aspect. What we mean by always that background music, our data shows that, what is the recorded data, not for one instance, but over a prolonged periods of time, and then how this particular data has been used for doing the management, okay. And organizational process performance, you need to worry whether the processes are performing as planned, and unless the processes perform as planned, it's meaningless, because you may say one thing, but it may not achieve the kind of levels that you want. Once you have done that, then the level 5 or optimizing level, where it's like a nirvana, where you go and sort of stay there on an ongoing particular basis. Remember again, level 5 is not a one time kind of achievement. So, the organizational innovation and deployment is the thing, okay. So, on an ongoing basis, you need to do the improvements, and these innovations need to be put into practice. And cause analysis and resolution, again particular thing, what we are doing is finding out why things went wrong and learning from it and making sure that we improve our pool of standards and practices, so that similar mistakes are not happening again and again and again. So, if you were to now look at this kind of a situation, let us see that what kind of a visibility comes up with the particular processes. So, if you go to the slide, you will see that when you go from level 1 to level 4, 5, what is happening is that the process being, just like a true black box, with nothing known about what is happening inside, to start defining it and then define it at a more granular level, and then here we start using the feedback, and then here we start making the improvements, okay. So, with this particular kind of a approach, you will see that there is a great deal of improvement in the process visibility. So, you go from one level to another level, the visibility will be improving. If you have to see what will happen to the performance, then you can look at the next slide, So, the capability. So, what will happen is when you go from level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what is happening is, first and foremost, the differences between the targeted results and the actual results are reducing. Okay, so you are able to target very close to where you want. Second, the variability in performance is going to go down, that the distributions are going to become narrower and narrower and narrower. Okay, and what you will basically find, your target results improving, in the sense that on an ongoing basis the probability of success is going to be very high. So, in this particular manner, once you go from one level to another, you can see distinct improvements. Now, we go to the other model that we have. So, you look at the slide again. So, now we look at the continuous representation. Okay, what you are doing in continuous representation is, the components are summarized by process areas, like from that particular thing. Okay, rather than in earlier case we got them by levels. So, what happens is that each process area is specific goals and the specific practices, and the specific goals and practices are again grouped into areas, and these practices are sort of generic as well as the specific that we have already seen. Okay, we apply this particular kind of approach, and then what you see is a slightly different arrangement. We have capability levels, okay, generic practices, specific practices, goals and process areas, but we did not try to have a common sort of a structure like the 4 generic groupings of the generic practices, has not been done in this particular kind of a situation. Now, the key process is a terminology from the earlier model. Process areas, as we got in the CMMI, are exactly the same, but if you now look at the slide, you find that the same areas have been organized by different groups. So, you have engineering group and the project management and the process management and the support particular groups, and on this scale they have been organized by the levels, maturity levels, and So, now what happens is basically the same 22 process areas have been specified here. Now, once we got this particular thing, then we do the assessment for a continuous model. We do the assessment for individual process areas, okay, and for maturity level kind of approach, we do the assessment for level by level. That is a major particular thing. Now, let us look at what are the main differences and similarities between the capability levels and the maturity levels. Okay. So, if you look at the slide again, the similarity, by design, the granular information contents of the two models is virtually identical. Okay, and the basis for evaluation of progress in each particular process area is exactly the same. So, there is no difference in that particular way. Now, what is the difference? They have a different representation of grouping the practices. They differ in the way these particular goals and practices are deployed, applied and improved. Okay, and obviously the two provide different benefits. Okay, how do these particular things differ from each other? So, what happens is, okay, if you look at the progression point of view, in a stage model, you introduce a sequence of improvements from very basic, to go from one level to predetermined level to the next particular. So, the path is already chalked out for you, and it's like you got to go from one to next to next to next. Okay, and the progressive, these particular levels are progressive in the sense that level 1 requirements are like not there, but level 2 requirements are prerequisite for being at level 3 and so on and so forth. So, the progression is very gradual from lower level to higher. So, you are achieving your overall improvement in the organization's particular practices. Now, as against this, so what you are doing, to just for a moment, look at the slide again. See, we are looking at establishing a culture of excellence in the organization. We say that the organization as a whole, we keep on going from one level to next to next. Now, when we look at the progression or continuous kind of a model progression, okay, what it does is you find out which are the areas in which you are weak, and then maybe you can do a cost benefit analysis or any other particular and say which particular process areas need to be improved, and where will you get maximum benefit at minimum cost in minimum time. Okay. So, the grants the explicit freedom to select the order of improvement. Understand the difference, in case of the stage model, the path is chalked out. In the continuous model, you can choose your own particular path, okay, that best meets the organization business needs and the relegates the organization, so wherever you think, is the major weakness, that is the thing. So, what simply is this particular model does is to allow you to sort of have a achievement profile to say where you are, and it also enables you to set a target profile as where you would like to be. And once you got, like here one is deciding where you are and the other is deciding where you want to be, and then allows you to set your own particular goals, so that the improvements can be achieved in a balanced kind of a manner. Okay. So, this particular kind of approach is used in a continuous model. Now, we ask a simple particular question, okay, what are the other considerations that go into the making of the particular model? Okay. So, the continuous model increases visibility into capability of individual process areas, okay, whereas the stage model increases the visibility level by level. Okay. The generic practices from higher capability areas can be applied to other process areas, whereas in case of stage model, the generic practices are grouped as institutionalized common features, and these particular practices need to be followed, for all process areas. Similarly, comparison within and across the organization can be done only on an individual process by process basis in a continuous model, whereas the stage model enables you to do comparison, across the organization from one project to another, and also you can do the comparisons from one organization to another organization. Okay. So, comparison with other standards, in that particular stage would be more difficult in a staged area, because it is a more it is not as granular in structure, only 5 levels, whereas the if you are in a continuous model kind of a situation, then like mapping one to one with the ISO model or something will be much easier for you to do. Now, we ask the next question, how do we choose the model? So, we ask a question, when should you choose a particular model? So, when do you choose a stage model? So, you say you choose a stage model when management wants to improve the overall development capability of the organization. The management must want to see an improvement in several areas, and it identifies the areas requiring that particular level. So, you say you are at level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then so if you look at it, so management wants to improve the overall capability, wishes to see the improvement in several areas, and identifies the areas requiring attention, so that particular kind of a situation. Okay. So, you have the continuous model you will choose, when you are happy with most of the processes, but you see that certain improvements are required in certain particular areas, then you will do the improvements in those particular areas. Let us now look at what would be a good roadmap to achieve the levels. Okay. So, at first thing is you have to initiate, somebody must feel like wanting to put the SCI CMM into practice. Okay. So, what will you do? So, you will initiate the process, then you will have some understanding about the SCI CMM, what it is, levels, models and selection and all that. Then you will have to do a gap analysis at class C. Now, we are using a terminology, in terms of doing the assessment. So, first at a macro level, and then at a macro level, and then at a micro level kind of a situation. So, your gap analysis is done on a basic. So, once you got some idea about what are the broad weaknesses that you got in your organization, you can start planning to overcome these particular kind of weaknesses. So, the action planning. Remember, the whole idea is, once the very fact that you want to do an assessment means that you would like to take a step forward and find out where you are weak, and those particular activities can be initiated. Once you got the initial class C weaknesses under control, the next thing that you are going to do is to do the formal part. So, on one side you are going to do process enhancement. Okay. So, you will already have some processes in writing, but these particular processes need to be improved on a ongoing basis, and improving the process is not good enough. The improved process need to be implemented. Okay. So, you have the process enhancements and process improvements, so you have more and more processes and they put in practice. Okay. And once you have done that, you can do a class B kind of assessment, pre-assessment. Okay. So, once you do a class B kind of a pre-assessment, you will know again where you are lacking, okay, and wherever you find the gaps, then undertake the closing of the gaps for pre-assessment kind of activity. Once you have done this, then the next particular thing is you would like to have a formal assessment. Now, remember, the emphasis in CMMs is on self-assessment. So, usually the assessment is done by people within the organization under the guidance of a trained person, somebody who has for instance achieved a proficiency in, has got a certification in SCAMPI approach method, like we have mentioned earlier. Okay, then this particular person is going to do that particular job. So, what you are really going to do is, when you want to do the formal assessment, you are going to systematically identify a group of people, so that you make sure that there is no bias in the sense that you pick only favorites, or you pick people only from certain areas and not from other areas, or one project or another. Systematically choose good people. Okay, those particular assessment team members, if you were to look at the slide again, these assessment team members are trained by the leader, okay, the trained person who is going to guide the assessment, and then it is these ATMs really are the ones who go in the sort of whole company to different areas. It is all planned, who is going to go where and do what kind of checking. They go and do the relevant measurements and come back, and under the guidance of the facilitator, all this data is put together, and then the group as a whole, keeps on deciding which particular level, capability level or the maturity level, needs to be assessed, and when the entire assessment is complete, at the end of it, you will get the appropriate certification. It is not certificate, the label of being at a particular level or a maturity level or capability level that you are interested in. And remember, here we said that the whole process is aimed in such a way that there is no likelihood of your failure. Basically, the rate of progress from one end to another end can be slow, but under normal circumstances, once you got a will, there is always a way to achieve it, and you are going to reach that particular level. The most difficult thing is, of course, to stay at level 5. Another major particular weakness, we have said that once an organization undergoes an assessment under CMMI, it is not obliged to reassess itself. Though if your real purpose is to sort of improve your organization, then you will continue to do the self assessments on an ongoing basis, so that you know exactly where you stand